Welcome back to Adaptive Humans, the podcast where we engage in real talk and intentional growth. I'm your host, Jami. If you caught episode 1, you know the show is more than just leadership tips or surface level conversations. It's about being brave enough to show up as our full selves across differences and in the messy realities of life. At the heart of this podcast are 3 anchors I'll keep returning to: emotional intelligence, cultural intelligence, and nervous system regulation. They're the compass that helps us connect, adapt, and lead, especially in moments that stretch us. If you missed it, you can check out the short overview of each in episode 1. Today, I want to bring to you a very real theme: grief anniversaries. Before I dig into this topic, I want to talk a little bit about purposeful vulnerability. Purposeful vulnerability is choosing to share openly, not for oversharing's sake, but to create connection. We often hear that vulnerability is a superpower in leadership and it helps form connections in all types of relationships. And I think vulnerability is important. I want to stress that each of us should have the space to choose what parts of our stories we want to reveal, and they will not be the same for everyone, even at different seasons of our lives. And that's okay. Bringing your full self to a situation can absolutely be with clear boundaries that you define. Purposeful vulnerability is a way of doing that. It's a value I hold dear on this show, for me and for the guests who will share their stories. As we engage in this discussion about grief, I want us to keep in mind that we all have the right in any aspect of what we talk about to utilize purposeful vulnerability to choose what we share and what we don't share. While this might seem like a hard topic, what is harder about navigating grief is when people around you either have no idea how to navigate it or they fumble through or maybe even don't acknowledge it at all. And it's sometimes about the grief anniversaries, and other times it's about small dates that people might not even know about that we're navigating. Grief anniversaries aren't just personal, they ripple into our families, communities, and even our workplaces. How we honor them or avoid them tells us a lot about how human we allow ourselves and, frankly, others to be. In today's episode, I hope by sharing parts of my own story and some resources, it will help others navigate grief anniversaries with more support. In particular, as this episode is dropping on the eve of the 24th anniversary of 9/11, I want to be the first to say to you, I recognize that we all process these collective grief anniversaries differently. If today is not the day you want to listen to this episode, that is completely fine. I hope you'll come back to it. Beyond the bio is the part of the show where we go deeper than titles and resumes. It's about the values, experiences, and stories that shape who we are and how we navigate the world. I have a lifelong connection with grief. It's not something I would have realized was so connected to my story when I was growing up or in early adulthood. But as I have more time and more life lived to kind of look backwards, I definitely can understand how much grief was interwoven in my story. I myself, as I sit here to record this episode, I'm just weeks away from one of my biggest grief anniversaries in my life, which is my mother's passing. My mom had multiple sclerosis for almost 20 years before she passed. I was only 32 when she died, and she was only 60. So we didn't get as much time together as we would have liked on this earth. And there's so much of her legacy that I know lives on through me and through others in my family. But for me, those grief anniversaries aren't just about the anniversary of her death, but there's so many other moments: birthdays, my birthday, holidays. The other thing about grief is it's not always about anniversaries. It's that random Wednesday that sort of overwhelms you and engulfs you like this wave that you can't control. And so I don't want to overhype that the anniversary is the only time that really affects people with grief. Grief is a thing that you sort of live with, you navigate the world with in varying different ways. But the anniversaries are some of these different moments and anchors where it really means something when other people in your life acknowledge it, that say, hey, I know what today means for you. And if it's hard for you, know that I'm here and I'm thinking of you. Very simple words like that can make all the difference in someone's life. And I know how much they've helped me. Part of what I realized in my own grief story is it's not just for me about the loss of my mother, but the connection to her story and the loss that she had of her own mother. My mom lived a lot of her life without her mother on this earth. My grandmother died the day before my mom's 12th birthday. And so my mom's birthday for her was always hard every year. I can remember feeling naive as a kid and seeing her feel sad and thinking, wow, like it's been so long, you still feel sad? And at that point, when I had those thoughts early in life, I was too young to really understand the depths of grief and know that, like, it is literally something you carry with you throughout your journey. But I remember my grandfather calling every Good Friday because Good Friday was the last day my mom spent with her mother before she passed. And I remember thinking, wow, he calls every year to remind her of this day. And in some ways, it felt almost like it made her more sad. And again, in my own childhood eyes, I would look at it and think, well, maybe if he didn't call, it would help. And as time has passed, and I've had a lot of time and a lot of life to reflect on this, it was his way of connecting with her. It was his way of acknowledging, I know how much today means. And I know this loss that we experienced together. And it created this connected web between the two of them. And so I don't know that it actually ever made her feel more sad. I think it just gave her a space to express and release that grief out of her. I think that's something that we'll talk about as we proceed in this episode, that releasing grief is actually really important. When I think about my mom's grief and how it carries through in a thread to my own grief, we often don't acknowledge the generational trauma and grief we carry forward, even when it's not our own direct loss. And frankly, there's so much that we've learned about generational trauma and adverse experiences that rewire people's brain and their nervous system. And so it only compounds your own grief experiences, both the personal and collective that we navigate amongst each other, that we have all these different things that can happen throughout our lives. And so for me, two of the biggest losses that are woven into my story is my mother's loss of her mother and my own loss of my mom at an earlier age, and the experience of caregiving. And I'll save that for a separate episode because it's a lot to take in. But I want to acknowledge that grief doesn't always occur when you've lost someone from this earth. Grief can occur when you're caregiving for someone who's still here, but they're not in the same state that you once knew them in. Grief can occur for people in a loss of a job, a loss of a relationship, a loss of all different types of things in our lives. And so when we think about grief anniversaries, they're not just dates on a calendar. They're threads woven through generations. They shape how we love and how we parent and how we show up for ourselves and each other. So if you know this kind of personal loss, I hope you know you're not alone. I have found that when I share about my own grief experiences, it gives others permission to do the same. And even more importantly, it lets others know that they're safe and they're with a person that they can talk about their own feelings, which gives our stories, our grief, and our memories that we want to keep alive so much purpose. It doesn't make me sad to talk about my mom, though sometimes you'll see me express tears and sadness. It actually brings me joy and purpose to know that her story and her memories live on through me and in the way that I navigate the world. And I think that's how a lot of people feel that have navigated different types of grief. You want to be able to talk about what that person, that place, that thing, that experience meant to you. And you want to be able to keep memories that feel important to you alive. The more that we feel the capacity to be able to share our experiences and share what our loved ones meant to us with others is a real true way to live on through navigating grief. A Brave Enough Moment segment is where we talk about the moments when we had to step forward, even when it was messy or uncertain. Because courage doesn't mean perfect, it means being brave enough. And part of having this segment come to life for me, when I think about grief anniversaries, it actually is anchored in a story of what leads to a decision. In a split second, maybe you have to make a tough call, but in other times, you make decisions that change the trajectory of your life. And for me, that was when I moved to New York to go to graduate school at NYU. I was in my first year teaching high school after graduating from undergrad, and I knew that there was more that I wanted to study, and I knew that there was more that I wanted to do in this world. And so when I got accepted to NYU, I remember a number of people in my life thinking I was kind of crazy to walk away from a job that I had that was paid to pursue this thing that was going to cost me a lot of money that I was going to pay for myself and take out student loans for. But I just knew somehow in my mind that this was a part of my story. And what solidified that for me was I had never been to New York City before. And so I flew to New York for a weekend. I happened to know one person, a friend who was there, who was kind enough to let me sleep on her couch. And I explored the city for the first time. I remember going down and meeting with the advisors and people at the university. I remember walking through Washington Square Park. And I remember this overwhelming feeling that if I do not do this, I will regret it for the rest of my life. Like, this has to be my choice. I'm going to date myself, but I remember running to the payphone and calling my mom and saying, I have to do this. If I do not make this choice, I will regret it for the rest of my life. My mom loved the idea that I was a teacher. She thought I was such an incredible teacher. And I remember she was one of the people that kept being like, are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure? But in that moment on the phone, with the confidence and the feeling I had in that moment, I will forever be grateful to her because she not only gave me roots, but she gave me wings. And she said, okay, then this is what you're going to do. And that was it. And so I moved to New York and I went to grad school and I had this incredible experience of navigating New York, which is both incredibly hard and incredibly invigorating all at the same time. The other thing I'll say about the experience of living in New York is that literally you could reinvent yourself every day. And half the time, no one would know the difference because there's so many people and there's so much happening at any given moment in time, pretty much 24 hours a day. That what I realized is that if I could figure out who I was when no one was looking, when no eyes were on me because of that sort of anonymity that can kind of come with living in New York, then I could really get to know myself. And that's exactly what happened for me in NYU. So if you fast forward in the story, my program was meant to be about a year and a half long, write your practicum, do all these things. And because I was paying for it myself, I had got this wild idea that I can surely take 18 units a semester, write my practicum, and graduate in 9 months. And so myself and a few others ended up doing this, and I did save money. Towards the end of my program in that year, I fell in love with New York and I wanted to stay. And opportunity wise, job wise, it just didn't somehow work itself out. And so I ended up teaching in Boston and I ended up living in Boston. I'll never forget the day I woke up and went to school and was in the rush of teaching and all of these things. And I could see we had these windows in our classrooms that would sort of stop. And the window, I could see the counselor or maybe it was the vice principal outside the window trying to get my attention. And so I sort of stepped towards the door and he had me come outside and he basically handed me a piece of paper and said, I need you to read this to your students in the most calm way you possibly can, because if they have phones, they're going to figure out what happened. And I thought, okay, I came back inside and I'm looking down and I'm reading. And of course, the minute I have seniors or 17, 18-year-olds in a classroom and they're looking at me and saying, Miss, what's happening? What's happening? You have to tell us. And so as I'm reading, I'm hearing what happened while simultaneously telling my students what happened on 9/11. And what was so incredible that I'll never forget is these young people in the room were all like, Miss, I know that you just lived in New York. You must have friends there. They were like, we're going to be quiet. You call the people you need to call. Get your phone. It's okay. And like in this moment, these young kids were just there helping me. And so, long story short, we got through the day, which was very trying because as things started to unfold, where things had occurred in Boston, I had students whose parents worked there. There was just a lot of uncertainty and a lot of fear, and whether or not to release kids out of school and all of these things. So, all this to say, your whole life and moment and your whole experience as a teacher is to make the kids feel safe. So I sort of had to push down what my experience was and to show up for these young people all day to make them feel safe while they were uncertain about loved ones that they had, both in Boston and New York, and sort of everything was unfolding. And if I fast forward to later in the day, the most meaningful moment for me was hearing from the last of my friends in Lower Manhattan, and particularly one of my friends who was evacuated across, and without going into all the details, just the traumatic experience her and her parents had, but knowing that they were alive and they were safe. They were the last people I had been waiting to talk to. And so I remember calling my mom, and wow, I didn't think I would get this emotional telling the story, but I remember calling my mom and collapsing on the floor to tell her that she was safe, that my friend and her parents were safe, and just saying, like, there is a plan for my life. I don't know what it is, but I live 2 blocks south of the World Trade Center, and I was meant to be there that day. I was meant to still be in graduate school. I was still probably going to be in my apartment. Lower Manhattan was my neighborhood. It was the place I walked in and out of. It was the place that was blockaded for months after 9/11. And it was everything from the people I knew personally to the bodega where I got my slice and my soda when I was studying at 3 in the morning, to all these different ways in which in New York, you know people that you don't know because you see them every day. And so as I reflect on grief anniversaries, that whole first year after September 11th, I dreamt regularly throughout that first year, and I would see the faces of the people that I didn't know, but I saw every day. The people who work the turnstiles and the base of the World Trade Center, to the homeless people that I saw on a regular basis as I walked through to get to the train. And these were the people and the images that stuck in my mind. And so on the first anniversary, when they televised and played every name and every face of every person, I sat and watched every single one because I wanted to know if any of the people in my dreams that I didn't know, but I knew their faces, were there. And so these are the things that large scale traumatic events. And this is just a microcosm of someone who wasn't actually there in the physical space when it happened, but it was like someone destroyed my backyard while I wasn't home and killed and injured so many people and changed the trajectory of a community forever that was so sacred and special to me while I wasn't home. And so you can have firsthand, secondhand grief and trauma and experiences that connect you to things that you don't always know. And so this collective grief can really depend on where we were, who we knew, what we carried in any given moment. And sometimes a brave enough moment means honoring your own grief while respecting that others have their process and they're handling it and navigating it in their own ways. There is no one right way to grieve, individually or collectively. Overall, when I think about living in New York, it changed my life forever for the better. I am more of who I'm meant to be in this world because of that brave enough moment in Washington Square Park when I picked up that phone and I called my mom and said, I have to do this or I will regret it for the rest of my life. And somehow my story has been woven in a way that I'm still here. I'm still here to tell it. And so sometimes our brave enough moments open the door to a dream that we've never anticipated. And part of that story and journey might also have sorrow and feelings and other things. But it's just about taking that one step, that one action towards that thing that could change your life forever. I appreciate you taking the time to hear parts of my story. I want to acknowledge, did not anticipate getting quite that emotional in episode 2 of Adaptive Humans, but here we go beyond the things that are surface level. And tears are an expression of releasing stress out of your body, which is a perfect segue into our Just Be Reset, which is our segment about how we can take small moments and actions throughout our day and throughout our lives to really help support our nervous system regulation and manage and release stress, anxiety, grief, any kinds of things that we're processing through, not just our minds, but our bodies process these things. So I wanted to introduce really quickly this concept that I learned that was so incredibly helpful from the book Burnout, The Secret of Unlocking the Stress Cycle. And it's by Emily and Amelia Nagoski. I hope I'm saying your last name correctly. But this is two sisters who wrote this book. It's a great read. Anyone that's navigating stress, burnout, this book is a game changer. And the key idea of this book is really about stress isn't just in our minds, it's in our bodies. And unless we complete the stress cycle, it lingers. So when you think about stress cycles and it lingering in your body, that's a day-to-day thing, even before we get to grief, even before we get to big events that might happen in our lives or a stressful thing. Every day, just as a natural human experience, we navigate levels of stress throughout our lives. It's completely normal. And what I didn't realize until reading this book was thinking about like, we're basically stacking our stress on top of each other when we don't release it. So it's really important that we find ways, ideally on a daily basis, if we can, not to linger. And so when you tie this in with grief anniversaries, you can actually reopen that cycle of stress that might be living in your body because you maybe haven't fully processed it. What helps is not ignoring it, but by completing it. Things like movement, whether that's going for a walk in nature, dancing is actually really great, shaking it out, literally shaking your body, trampoline workouts, all of that really releases it from your body. Also, maybe depending on what your body's able to do, creative expression also helps. Writing, journaling, music, art. I will tell you, while I grew up going to performing arts schools my whole life, was a dancer, actress, did all kinds of things, the visual and like physical art, you don't want any kind of thing I design. If a mug, you would not be able to drink coffee out of it. My painting is not going to hang in any wall, let alone some art gallery. But I have found the most cathartic aspects of release of stress in actually drawing, in actually allowing myself to just buy some paints at the store and a canvas and paint it out. And it's again that act of not looking for perfection, but just looking for something that creates a release and an ease. The other aspect that can help release a stress cycle is connection, a hug, a good hug where someone grabs you, holds on for 20, 30 seconds, tears, laughter. I feel a release just by crying on this episode. So there are ways in which that you can release the stress cycle on a regular basis. I want to invite listeners to try one this week. It's not a quick fix, but a way that you can help release the stress for yourself. So that's today's episode of Adaptive Humans. We explored the quiet weight of grief anniversaries, the way they can stir up emotions, show up differently across cultures, and even trigger our body's nervous system responses, just in the act of talking about it. If there's one thing I hope you carry with you, it's this: purposeful vulnerability creates space for connection, whether that's naming your own grief or simply holding space for someone else's. These moments are where adaptability and humanity meet. My invitation to you this week is to notice, breathe, and ask yourself, what grief anniversaries shape your story? How might you honor them in a way that connects rather than isolates you? Or if grief is not an intimate part of your story yet, consider how you can be aware and support others. Even saying to someone else, or maybe you're a people leader or a manager of a team, you could literally say, I know grief anniversaries can be unpredictable, and I encourage everyone to take care as we navigate the 9/11 anniversary tomorrow, or the anniversaries we know that are coming up in the months ahead. Remember, adaptability is not built in theory. It's built in these everyday choices to show up in our conversations, in our teams, our communities, and in ourselves. Join us in the next episode for part 2 of this discussion about grief, where we talk to Carrie Sokup, a purpose-driven creative leader and founder of the Sentiment Project, which is a space she created for helping others process grief through creativity. You won't want to miss Carrie's story and how she helps others truly tap into their own creativity to process grief. Episodes going forward will drop weekly on Tuesdays, wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, remember, I am brave, I am enough, I am brave enough, and so are you. This is Adaptive Humans, real talk, intentional growth.